time, 9 till 5, Monday to Friday for a year. It was £9.62 per hour. It wasn't not great, but I was there to learn, right? My mum used to pick me up after work and say to me, son, how is work going today? And I just used to smile and say, it was fine, mum, but really, what's for dinner? The issue was that I was in a fully remote team. As a shy 20-year-old, I felt alone, like something had to give. So I went to HR, and after numerous meetings with them, they let me travel to each country that my team members lived in. So now I'm 20 years old, and I'm being given this unique experience that not a lot of people get to have. And I had to make this work. I had to go outside my comfort zone. So on my travels, I landed in the US, and I met two guys that I'm honored to still call my friends today. And they are Matt and Andrew. So these guys saw something in me, a shy yet driven 20-year-old that just needed a little bit of a push to show his full potential. And I remember them always used to saying to me when I was over there in the US, Steve, put this Windows thing down and pick up Linux and you won't look back, trust me. But I ignored them. I knew best. I was this arrogant 20-year-old that thought I knew what was best for me. So I completed my placement year and graduated university, and then started a few jobs as a .NET developer. Whilst I was graduating, Matt and Andrew both left Eli Lilly and joined Arcus. So one of my first jobs was as a consultant, and I went on site at the Houses of Parliament to help the business as usual team. That team internally was known as the Lifecycle team. So the meaning of lifecycle, if you don't know, is the series of changes that a living thing goes through between them being born and their death. And this is where my tech lifecycle really started. So at Parliament, I ended up turning into some kind of CI/CD consultant, trying to help them ship releases faster. However, the business as usual team had an interesting issue. They could only run one version of a specific package at a specific time. And because they were looking after 52 applications, different versions have been upgraded and different versions have been downgraded. So it became really difficult to manage. And around this time, Matt and I used to catch up on Skype regularly, and he kept waxing lyrical about this container thing. He said it's going to change DevOps forever. And this is all he said for months and months on end, over and over again. And then again, history repeated itself. I wasn't interested. I had enough to worry about, thinking about how I was going to make these guys ship releases faster. So a year later, Arcos that Matt and Andrew were now working at was acquired by Docker. So this is a company now built around containers. So I'm starting to think to myself now, maybe Matt is right after all. So I invested in a MacBook and started playing with this thing that I call, that's known as Docker. So now I can run two containers of running different versions of an application at the same time on the same machine. And I was like, this is a game changer, right? If I can take this back to the organization that I've been put on site with, this is really going to change the way they can innovate and ship features to their customers. So at this point, I was talking to Matt almost daily. I wanted to get the inside scoop. I wanted to know what's next. And that is a passion that stayed with me throughout my career to date. It's the same now with Kubernetes. So first it was Docker Compose, then it was Swarm, then it was the registry, and then it was data center. And then I encountered these two words, port wrangling. So I wanted to scale replicas of the container, exposing a specific port on the same machine, and I couldn't. So I needed to start to look for alternatives, and this is where my journey with Kubernetes starts. So it was around early 2016, and I started playing with Kubernetes. It was Kubernetes 1.2. For those of you who are familiar with 1.2, we didn't even have deployments then. Deployments were alpha in 1.1. That's how early on we're talking. But it had the basics, right? It had things like the liveliness and readiness probes. I could finally codify my application and tell it when and how it should receive live traffic. I no longer just had to boot a container and pray that I got a successful response. But the important thing to note here is it was, from the complexity from Swarm to Kubernetes is a massive jump. And I remember tweeting on Twitter about my confusion, and then some guy called Kelsey reached out to me. And he said, hey, let's jump on Skype. I've got an hour. And I said, sorry, Dad, I can't eat with you and Mum tonight. Some guy from Google wants to chat. This is probably pretty interesting. So he distilled the fundamentals of Kubernetes to me as a bowl of fruit, and it instantly just clicked. I was still awake at 1 a.m. drawing this bowl of fruit out and kind of putting notes on it about how there was different areas of the control plane. Don't ask me how the following day at work went, or just forget that ever happened. But the lesson I learned here is learn the fundamentals first and then extend from there. And we're going to come back to that. So fast forward a year, I returned back to Parliament to help them build their website. However, this time it needed to be different. They wanted Amazon and they wanted all the DevOps. So the first thing on the list naturally for me is going to be containers. From a Kubernetes perspective, we're currently now on 1.6. So this is the dawn of RBAC. No more God mode inside the clusters, getting more enterprise grade now, perfect timing. The issue was the other team members. This kind of stuff was completely alien to them. They didn't even know what Docker was. And then I remembered Kelsey, always teach the fundamentals, 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 fundamentals. So with the team, we went on this journey together. I taught them Docker, then Compose, and then Swarm. Then finally, we moved on to Kubernetes and we started with things like pods and then deployments, and then naturally onto services and Ingress. And now they had the building blocks for starting to deploy these applications to Kubernetes. And the moment that all clicked was magical. That's the buzz that Kelsey gets. And now I was starting to feel it. The circle was starting to complete. And this is how a community works. One person knows something, they share it with another person. That person picks it up, runs with it, and then shares it on again. And that's how we should breed this community and how we can make it expand. So after leaving Parliament, I joined a New York consultancy called Apprender as a principal Kubernetes consultant. Somehow I managed to blag my way to a job implementing Kubernetes around the world with kind of limited real world experience. And I think the moral of the story here is that passion goes a long way. You've just got to know how to show it, right? You can learn anything, but you can't learn passion. You just have it. However, during this time, Kubernetes was experiencing the same journey the Linux kernel had. So the Linux kernel had distributions like Red Hat, Debian, Ubuntu, and now we're in the world of Kubernetes distros. I worked for a company that was building one, and that was called Kismatic. So it was a Golang wrapper around Ansible playbooks, and it was great until you wanted to extend it. So now it's time to learn Golang, I guess. The worry I had, though, was that this was going to cause fragmentation in the community. We're going to have the distro X community or the distro Y community. And this wasn't the plan for Kubernetes, in my opinion. It wanted to be the platform for everybody that everyone could engage with and use, no matter what industry you're working in. But during my time at Apprender, I really got to hone my skill set. I had a good idea of the tool chain to use for customers, things like Prometheus and Grafana, and Helm, we all used on client implementations. I could build out CI/CD pipelines that allowed us to leverage things like Helm to push changes into the cluster. I was giving talks, trainings, architecting enterprise clusters, and implementing them, and even handling some pretty complex incidents along the way. This shy 20-year-old on my placement year is now giving training to over 7,000 people worldwide, just by showing passion. When you have passion, it's important to empower others. That's community after all. However, the issue is, as a consultant, you never really finish anything. You always hand it back to the customer to complete, and then you move on to the next client engagement. After 18 months at Apprender, it was time to go it alone. I felt I had the experiences and connections that I needed to be an independent consultant. I ended up at Metal, and this is the place where I'm at today. I was brought in to lead a platform team and build a kick-ass Kubernetes platform. That was the CTO's words, not mine. And this is where I could take all that experience that I was lucky enough to gain across different industries, again, in different areas of the world, and finally implement them in this kind of dream cluster that I always wish I could have built. So it's like all my dreams have come true. I've been handed these controls and I've now just got to get on with it. I've blogged a lot about the implementation details on Medium, so I'm not going to go into those in detail here. But from a cloud native perspective, there's been an explosion of new tooling emerge in the last couple of years since I've been at Metal. And I want to take a little bit of time and touch on a couple of them. So let's start with Thanos. So Thanos now solves this problem of long-term storage and consumption of metrics. So before we just used to have a Prometheus instance, which would allow us to scrape metrics, but it would have a retention pot time. That could be amount of space on disk, or that could be hours or weeks or days. But when you're running as a large financial institution or a fintech, you want to be able to have these metrics for a long time. right, and look at trends over time and see how changes to Kubernetes, for example, has changed the way the application works. So we already had this Prometheus and these lovely Grafana dashboards that somehow seem to impress executives every time they saw them. They didn't even need to be accurate. They just didn't need to be read. But there's a few moving parts to Thanos, you may or may not know. And we had issues early on. 0.8 corrupted all our data stores, for example. But this highlights an important point. Always keep upgrading your toolset and don't be scared. The community is here to help, and it gets easier the more you do it. I guess, as they say, practice makes perfect. Talking of deployments, we embraced this GitOps journey pretty early on. I want to pause for a second and shout out Stefan Prodam from Weaveworks. For any of you who don't know him, this guy is the most hardworking and helpful guy I have met in a long time. But then again, I could shout out 50 people like Stefan in the community. The community is what makes this all work. The transparency to share, but most importantly, to be humble. We chat now as regularly as Matt and I were chatting about Docker back in the day. The ability for us to now pull changes into the cluster and have a consistent audit trail for changes has been game-changing for us. We now see these clusters as ephemeral. We upgrade clusters by creating a new one and reconciling that state that is currently stored in Git. So this journey from manually upgrading Kubernetes clusters in a physical data center, to writing Ansible playbooks, to automating this, to now seeing nodes as totally ephemeral. Well, what a journey, right? Finally, from a technical perspective, I want to leave you with Istio. So this tool is like a Swiss Army knife, right? I've cut myself numerous times with it. It has more custom resource definitions than I've created Helm charts. And believe me, I've created a lot. But now this is where the power of Kubernetes is really starting. Kubernetes as a kind of layer is starting to become a little bit boring, and we're now looking for higher level abstractions. And I'm blessed to be working with a great group of people that are constantly challenging the status quo. They're always asking me to think outside the box. They're always questioning my understanding. And the team and the wider team at Metal have really helped me improve. And I'm genuinely extremely grateful for that. But I want to take a moment to reflect away from technology to the other side. And the other side is life. Sometimes our drive to learn and complete the next story or issue takes you away from the thing that's really standing in front of you. I've been part of this myself. I've lost friendships, I've lost relationships along the way. And I want to say this to you, don't let the present pass you by, because when it's all said and done, those pretty dashboards aren't memories you can share with loved ones and families, but they are going to be the reason why you can't share them. So what's next? Like I said, Kubernetes itself is becoming boring. It's stable and mature. It's dominating the market. It's become the de facto standard deployment and orchestration target. However, managing your own clusters now is taking a lot more effort and thought. This is why I see Cluster API as an important step forward. I want to be able to deploy clusters using a GitOps workflow. This is not far off, right? There's people that are working on this right now. I also think there's going to be a lot of new projects springing up around observability. We now have an easy way to deploy and manage our applications, but how do we know how well they're performing? And how can we make decisions at request time in a real-time scenario? I'm keeping a close eye on Apache Sky walking in this space. I'd recommend that you check it out too. It's what customers such as Alibaba Cloud use, the largest cloud in the world. If they're using it, it's probably going to be right. For me personally, I have a contract until the end of September, and then we'll see what happens. If I get extended, great. I would love to continue with the awesome team at Metal. But if God has other plans, then I'm available. I guess we call that the personal we're hiring slide. So I want to leave you with a few parting thoughts. Drive and passion will take you so far, but collaboration will take you even further. Go outside your comfort zone, talk to people. A lot of people have already come up and experienced the issue that you're experiencing, or maybe they haven't, and maybe you can share and gain some common understanding. The open source community is about learning, but I think most importantly, it's about giving back and sharing. Always learn the fundamentals and then build from there. Remember what Kelsey told me. Don't turn on all the features straight away. Little, slow by slow. And finally, we're all on this journey together, from the vendors trying to sell us tools to the customers consuming their products. But tech is just the implementation. The real value is changing people's lives and helping to shape the future. Thank you.
Brilliant, Steve. Thanks very much for that. Appreciate that. I love the part you mentioned about just having the real passion drives you through quite a lot of things. I think if you fully commit to something, it's quite hard to fail at it. So yeah, I love that. I'll just give it a few minutes in the chat box in case anybody's got any specific questions for you.
Okay.
And then what we'll do, I'll open the floor up to you and also to Johan. Bunch of people have got in touch, like I said, so there's a few questions for you and Johan to both, I guess, have a little bit of debate, a little bit of a chat, give your opinions on it. So I'll just wait a few minutes if there's any questions for you, mate.
Sure.
No, none have come through. So yeah, thanks again, Steve. Appreciate your time. And also Johan, I think you're unmuted now, Johan.
Yeah, hope so.
Thank you. I appreciate both of your time. Sebastian, our first speaker, he's obviously a man in demand. He's at another chat, so it's just yourself and Steve that are left. What I'll do, there's a few questions, like I said. I'll just throw them both to you from some of the people that are in the group still. So the first one is from Brendan Camp. His question is, what do you see as the next steps after Kubernetes? And that's to both of you. I'm just going to unmute Steve. Sorry, one sec. Cool.
Thanks, Paul. Johan, do you want to go first or shall I?
You start. You already started while being mute, so please repeat yourself.
Can you repeat the question? Sorry, Paul.
Yeah, sure. So what do you see as the next steps after Kubernetes?
I think it's now the importance around the applications that you're currently running, right? Going back to what I said before, the ability to be able to deploy the applications is now kind of easier, right? To Johan's point, he was talking about Helm, then you've got other tools like Customize. There's a plethora of other tools for deploying applications. Now I think it's going to be about how do we handle those applications? How do we route traffic to different versions? How do we really get to understand how customers are using the system? And I don't kind of mean just like features from the front door, like how are they using the billing service or how are they using the invoicing service, but how much of the platform is actually being used and where can we save costs? And getting a better, more kind of fine-grained understanding in that area, I think, is the next kind of logical step.
Nice, thanks.
So I would like to elaborate a bit on that. Kubernetes is becoming boring, so I would see a future where less people have to care about Kubernetes, but more at sort of higher level abstractions. So, I mean, right now there's too many different ways of running serverless on top of Kubernetes, which is the one to go. Similarly, for all the people doing machine learning and whatnot. So, I mean, how do you make all of these different frameworks integrate nicely with Kubernetes while leaving the actual developers totally unaware of that this thing happened to run on Kubernetes? I mean, that sort of future I would like to see. And then, as I mentioned earlier, broader adoption for those sort of late industries that haven't really moved to the cloud yet. And so, I mean, what can Kubernetes provide to them? Or should they just stay with their virtual machine-based or even bare metal data center? How can Kubernetes help these people sort of become more innovative without migrating to a public cloud?
Agreed, right? And like with the plethora of operators that are coming out in the Kubernetes space, you're getting these abstractions, right? The ability to be able to run Kafka from a single YAML file and let the operator take care of the kind of heavy lifting and have all of the, you know, intelligence and deep understanding implemented in the operator. I think we're going to see a plethora of operators come out now as well to abstract this even further, so you don't have to worry about it.
Nice. All right, brilliant. Thanks, guys. Brendan, I hope that that answered your question. Thanks for sending that in. Next one is from Ejimofa Nwoyi. Hope I pronounced your name correctly. His question is, what alternatives are recommended to Docker as a container runtime engine for Kubernetes?
Where do you want to begin?
high level.
I'll let Johan go first, as I went first before.
So in my experience, for most people, none. For those that have particular pesky security requirements and can live with either the performance overhead or the limited usability, there's a few choices here with different abstractions. It has, but I mean, there's a overall, I see a high cost in changing to something else in terms of either limited usability or performance overhead. So you really have to have a good case for switching. In particular, those various versions of nested virtualization can have a lot of performance overhead. And I mean, also if you limit the system interface to just a few sys calls, as some of these projects do, then your application may not even run anymore on Kubernetes just because it's changed the runtime. So you really have to consider it deeply. That's my take on it.
I'm going to say something controversial, which is I think that Docker's done. I think that if you look at other thinner runtimes like Containerd or Cryo or something like that, you only need a small resource consumption for you to be able to run your workloads. We're not using a large majority of what Docker's giving us out the box, if we really kind of boil it down. And I think like Docker themselves are trying to drive towards you to use Containerd, which is the smallest piece of the Docker runtime. I think, to your point, Johan, yeah, it is. You've got to be able to understand this thing quite deep to be able to make the switch. But I think it's only a matter of time before it's just a case of toggling it on or off which runtime you want.
Yeah, but then not everyone would need a sort of firecracker style, extra indirections, virtual machine style protections or something. I see many of these runtimes as rather niche right now.
Right.
Nice. Okay. Edgemofor, I hope that answered your question. Thanks for that. Next one is from Simon Westcott. His question is, where do you see Kubernetes in 3 to 5 years' time? I think you might have sort of touched on it throughout your presentations, but again, for Simon, sort of going maybe in a bit more detail.
I think for me personally, like where is it going to go? Well, it's going to become the de facto standard. For all industries, right? Right now, there's you've got the niche startups that can choose anything, that are choosing Kube or other technologies, Lambda or serverless, and then you've got the kind of incumbent legacy enterprise customers that are slow moving, that are starting to adopt this kind of technology. So if you look at like large investment banks in the UK, they're leveraging Kubernetes for some of their workloads. Obviously, they're not using them for the most critical workloads, but I think just with the adoption and the amount of companies that are in the CNCF and are putting money behind not just Kubernetes, but also the Cloud Native Compute Foundation in general and all of the products that Johan put on all of his slides, it's going to become a case where it's just going to be so easy to consume that you'd be silly not to really consume it, right? And you can focus on the areas that are important to you. And if we get these abstractions right, it's going to be focusing on the application and focusing on the thing that really gives you business value. And then all of this other stuff that people are implementing, like canary releases or how do you do rolling upgrades, all of that is starting to get taken care of by some higher level abstractions. If we can simplify that enough so that everybody can get on board with it, there's really no need for anybody not to be using this tooling. But it's a journey. Everybody's still on it. It's not done yet. But that's where I think it's going to get to.
So I would like to add to that I see Kubernetes as a great way of democratizing access to public clouds. Because right now you have the big American vendors that have so rich set of services, invested so much in the platform. But then if you look around in the rest of the world, you would have smaller providers, commonly based on an OpenStack that falls years behind what any other provider would have. But I mean, with the fully fledged Kubernetes platform available, I mean, some small company in Azerbaijan could become the local cloud provider and compete with a very rich set of services and fulfill the needs of their local community. So I see this as a great chance for more vendors to become cloud providers without actually having to invest heavily on the platform. Because I see the future stack for that kind of company as Kubernetes running on bare metal in their lone server rack in some small city in the world.
Yes, okay. Just before I move on to the next question, both of you, Ejimofa has come back in the private chat box, the gentleman that asked about recommendations to Docker. So he's said, it's more of a question about, I think, about his current role. He said the Prometheus stack is currently our default monitoring tool for our hosted Kubernetes clusters. The problem with that tool is it's not proactive in monitoring both applications, pod, and cluster instances, but reactive. So his question is, which alternative tools would you recommend from an open source perspective?
Probably not being the right person to answer here. I mean, I would just go for some generic forecasting and machine learning tool, and then just basically implement my own prediction stuff and adding various rules for proactively restarting, proactively scaling, and these things. I mean, that's what we're doing.
I would ask him if he could talk to kind of clarify the question a little bit, right? So Prometheus is proactively performing monitoring. So the question I would ask is specifically, what is the use case where it's not performing the way you'd like it to perform? There may be a specific thing you're trying to, like a prime example is auto scaling, right? Do you need to be able to auto scale off the back of some metric being exposed? Is that the kind of use case?
Yes, he's put yes.
Okay, so you can use custom metrics to be able to horizontally auto scale. You can also look at tools like Weaveworks Flagger that will do canary releases for you based on metrics that get exposed. I think a culmination of those two will probably suffice in terms of being able to kind of do the function and the features that you personally want. For me personally, I try and stick to the Cloud Native Compute Foundation as a kind of landscape of application or kind of software choices. So I think you've chosen some good ones there in your monitoring stack, and now it's just looking for other tools that plug the gap.
And throw in the odd time series forecasting tool if you want a even more proactive behavior. There are so many of these available.
Nice, okay. Thank you. He's put thank you in the chat box. So I think we answered I think you guys answered this question, which is really good. A few more questions. We have one here from JP, user called JP. He's asking for tips I think he's asking for Kubernetes. He's put tips on learning this on his own. So he's been muscling through EKS and Kubernetes on Minikube, but he just doesn't feel like he's making the most of it.
I give Kubernetes training if you want me to do a sales pitch.
Okay.
But in all seriousness, the way I like to learn is start with the problem, right? So what it sounds like you're trying to do is trying to learn Kubernetes, right? But shift the mindset the other way. Find a problem that's really annoying at work and try and get Kube to fix it. And then it will naturally take you down an avenue of learning. You can't, I think to Johan's point, if you go back to Johan's slides and look at all of the different tools that come together to make a platform, you can't possibly learn all of those immediately. But what you can do is you can choose the tools that really help you solve the problems. And that was what I was trying to talk about in my presentation and my talk. It's about using the technology to solve the business problem, not trying to learn the technology and then kind of shoehorning it into a business problem, if that makes sense. So I would say, look at something that's challenging in your current role, look at the options that you have available to you in Kubernetes, plug the two together, go back to your boss or your boss's boss and say, look, I've been looking at this tool and it could help us solve X, Y, and Z. And then you start to have that discussion. That's going to maybe start off into a little kind of niche squad or team that will actually start to do a little bit of a POC around this stuff. And then you can really go onto a trajectory and really start to unpick all this stuff.
Nice.
Yeah, great answer. And unless you have the luxury of having that sort of problem at work, buy yourself a couple of Raspberry Pis and start from there.
Nice one. Thank you for that. Question from Raj Paita. His question is, if you had to start again, what would you not do?
How long have you got?
Yeah, obviously, I think it's maybe someone. I don't think he's actually here. He might have been logged off, but he's actually a guy I think that's probably starting out on his journey, Kubernetes journey.
Johan, you want to go first, or?
Yeah, so I mean, we basically mid 2010s built our own orchestration, container orchestration system, saying how hard can it be just to connect a couple of Docker containers on different hosts and scale them up and down and make them talk to each other over the network without using DNS from the public internet, and the answer was a lot. So even though you don't see a lot of value in Kubernetes and all these abstractions, they're there for a good reason, and you will discover as you go. So basically trust what is in there to be there for a good reason, and not try to do your own thing.
I think for me personally, it would be around what I was saying to that gentleman, right? Take something small and iterate. Mm-hmm. I started the journey and I wanted to know absolutely everything. I wanted to know how Prometheus works inside out. I wanted to know how Ingress works inside out. And then Kubernetes is massive, right? If you actually take, like, people use a tiny, tiny slither of actually what's available to you. But if you try and actually spread yourself, you're going to spread yourself so thin that you'll not really know a lot about anything. You'll just know a little bit about a lot of things. So for me personally, it would be fundamentals. It always comes back to me, that thing that Kelsey said to me on that Slack, that Skype call, is start with the basics and then work from there. I went the other way around and got myself completely tangled. Just deploy plain YAML files to the API server. Don't even consider looking at Helm. Don't even consider looking at Customize. Just deploy something very basic and get it working. Then scale it out so that you've got multiple of them. Then try and access it from the internet. Like just basic stuff, and then build up and up and up until you've got a fully working, application.
Nice, thanks. Next one from a gentleman named Philip Limbeck. His question is, what tools are out there to orchestrate services across different Kubernetes clusters?
GitOps would probably be my choice. From an orchestration perspective, right, it's about getting the resources to the APIs. So if you've got, for me now in the journey that I've been on, rather than push-based, I'm talking pull-based. So have a kind of centralized location where your workloads sit. So that could just be a GitHub repository with a couple of YAML files. Have an agent that's running in each of your Kubernetes clusters and that are reconciling the directories that you currently have in Git. And then without you really having to think about it too much, the agents that are running inside are doing most of the heavy lifting, and that's how you're going to distribute. That's how at Metal we deploy to 10 clusters all the same way, and we deploy all the same kind of workloads. So for me, that's a good example. I think pushed base is a little bit more difficult. You have to update the CI/CD pipeline. You have to tell it that there's a new environment. It becomes a little bit more difficult. So if you're on that journey, I would start looking at GitOps. I've blogged about it. I'll make sure that we get all those links out there so that we can have some chats.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and the meetup group would be good. Yeah.
Yeah, so I would recommend actually taking in Kubernetes Federation for a spin. I mean, it's been around for many years, but now it's actually getting somewhere. We would have this sort of over control plane over the multiple clusters, steering deployments among them and reconciliating upon cluster failures and so on. It's still kind of early, but I would say useful at least. So that would actually add on top of the sort of very decentralized GitOps approach where the clusters don't really coordinate but synchronize for Git. But I mean, that's, I would say for rather specific cases still, if you actually want to go federation, because that's very hard. You commonly get into these split brain problems with various network segmentations and whatnot. So it's complicated, but it can be done if needed.
Again, right, it comes back to the same thing we're talking about. There's so many ways to skin the cat. It's about choosing the one that you feel most comfortable with.
Yeah, nice, okay. Next question comes from Andreas Summer. He's in this, he's still here now, so if I get the question wrong, Andreas, just send me a message, I apologize. I think he's asking, what hints there are when you're implementing DevOps services. So maybe similar to the question about what would you not do if you had to start again, you know, like an early adopter. I think the question is, what hints do you have for somebody or a business that's about to implement DevOps services in the company?
If I may start, I mean, you have to get the organization right. You cannot just say, oh, let's do DevOps, while you still keep your operations team and your dev teams. And these kind of culture changes are much harder than adoption of any type of tool. So I would say most failures we've been experiencing is really about not really getting the culture and the team composition right.
For me personally, it comes back to the same thing that I said before, right? Start with the problem, show the problem off to the people that are going to be the people that are going to make the decision yay or nay, and then iterate and turn their checklist of things and reasons why you can't use Kubernetes in your organization and start to tick them off one by one. And then start to keep, it'll be an iterative cycle, right? It's about, to Johan's point, it's a culture problem, but it's actually a people problem. The technology is the easiest part. The difficult bit is getting people on board. And the only way you really, for me personally, get people on board, one, bring them closer, and two, prove to them that it can be done. If you can do both of them, you're on your way.
Nice. Okay, next question. I think this one might be from an early adopter as well. The question from Oheen Nana is, how crucial is learning Kubernetes in the workplace? And is there a forum for troubleshooting errors for beginners? Not sure if that's like GitOps, you know, like you've mentioned, or.
Yeah, can I actually take this first, if that's okay, Johan?
Yeah, sure.
So I don't know if you've seen this iceberg picture, right? It's a very common iceberg picture, which above the water shows you in the office and below the water shows the grind to make you look extremely intelligent inside the office. You don't have to be in the office to learn, right? The best place to learn is at home because you haven't got the distractions. You haven't got people pinging you on Slack. Hopefully you haven't got incidents. In terms of the best place to learn, to my point, it's about the community, right? There's a Kubernetes Slack. There's hundreds of Slacks for all the different tools that are out there. It's about, for me personally, it was about coming outside my comfort zone and starting to have conversations with people, right? There's conversations, like I never thought that I'd be on the phone with Kelsey talking about Kubernetes, right? Kelsey knows everything about Kube, and here is a naive, 20-something year old guy asking him to explain how the API server works, right? And again, he was humble enough to spend that hour. There's hundreds of people like that are willing to help. It's just a case of asking the question. No question's a stupid question. The only stupid question is the one you don't ask.
Adding a bit to that, I guess there's more than 100,000 people on the main Kubernetes Slack right now. So I mean, that's perhaps not the most suitable Q&A forum, but what we see working out very well is sort of the very decentralized communities. I mean, there will be a Kubernetes Slack for your country, for your local language, or even for your city. And the sense of community boils all the way down to the grassroots. So you can actually find a lot of helpful people closer to you.
Nice, okay. James Glynn asks, which has the best user experience? EKS, GKE, or AKS?
Oh, I could wax lyrical about this. I'm going to play the diplomatic answer because I don't know who's going to watch this.
Politician answer.
I would go with GKE. The main reason why I'd say that, Google started Kube back in the day. They've got the most experience. They've run containers at ridiculous scale, way larger than probably everybody on this call is ever going to run them. And for me, it's quote unquote the easy button, right? There's other ones that are chasing. AKS is probably not far behind. I'd probably put EKS a little bit further behind that. But again, it comes back to how you're going to use it, right? They're all good, but they've all got ways of cutting you. This thing is not a silver bullet yet. It's on a journey to becoming the silver bullet, but there's always going to be that knife that's going to cut you somewhere along your journey. So if you have complete control of being able to choose any of the options, I would choose GKE. For us, we didn't. We had to go with Amazon. So
Mm. Yeah, I would say the same. And adding to that, all of the managed services are very good nowadays. So I see less and less need to actually run your own cluster, even though it's fun and great for gaining experience. But doing that in production and doing all the day two stuff, that's not really needed anymore.
Okay, nice. We have 2 more questions left, guys. So the next one is from a gentleman whose title is Thepakazi. His question is, how would you debug Kubernetes deployments? For example, how would you easily debug what headers my Ingress is sending to service/pods?
Come to my training. No, I joke.
This is like free training you're giving away, Steve.
It's fine. It's helping the community, right? We've all got to start somewhere. For me, it's about a consistent flow, right? So it's like an onion. So start from the outside and peel your way down to the center. So if you've got an Ingress controller, there's going to be things like, you're going to start to look at the Ingress logs, but actually you may not be even getting that far because your Ingress resource may be, wrongly configured. You may be trying to point to a service that doesn't exist, or it might be running on a port that doesn't exist. So for me, the best way I found to learn is around scenarios, right? So start to figure out some scenarios and work your way through them. Do this kind of red teaming exercise where you break something deliberately and you try and figure out what's going wrong. And then it's just going to be an iterative cycle of you building up this, what I would call like a run book, right, of where to start. And then that will get more and more convoluted and complex, and you'll have more detail in it over time. But to your specific question, the place to start is going to be logging, right? You need to start to put, logging in your service when you receive the headers, print the headers back out, put it in some kind of debug mode, toggle it on, see what you get back out, and then immediately turn it back off. But again, for me, it's understanding the flow, right? It's the fundamentals of starting with Ingress, going to service, going to deployment, going to pod, and what sits behind those things. And I think I talk a lot about this train diagram and how you should build a train. So start with a block at the top and call it Ingress, and then draw a line down and look at all the touch points along the journey of actually getting to your application, and then unpick them one by one. And then eventually you should be able to come to the solution.
Concur, Johan?
Nothing to add there. Great answer by Steve.
Nice one. Last question, gentlemen, is from Ricardo Dinuzzo. His question is, 1 cluster per environment or 1 for all?
Go on, Johan, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, depends on what they're trying to do. So, I mean, just as Sebastian said, with the easier way of creating and doing the lifecycle management for clusters, we see a trend towards smaller but more clusters overall. But really depends on your case. In some of the businesses we've been working with, there's very strict requirements, so you cannot just use namespace separation between staging and production, these things, but you really need strict isolation, either for that flow or across different applications or departments within the organization. But it depends on what you're trying to do.
I would go with always 1 cluster per environment, and I'll explain the reasons why I say that. Think about the rogue employee scenario, or think about someone that doesn't really understand Kubernetes, or you as an organization is starting this Kubernetes journey. You're not going to know about things like resource quotas. You're not going to know like limit ranges and stuff like that, and ways that you can stop bad things from happening. What do you do in the scenario whereby you're running production and staging on the same cluster and someone says that he needs 64 gig of memory rather than 6? Right? You're going to blow yourself, you're going to blow out production. As well as that, for me, it's about consistency. So consistent logging, consistent monitoring. And the way that's going to happen is if you've got these kind of cookie cutter clusters that you rubber stamp out. And then the way that you direct your traffic to those clusters is based on your domain name. So STG for staging, DEV for dev. And I know that if I map my namespace to part of my subdomain, I know the routing logic there. And as well as that, it's going to be easier for you to capacity plan, right? So you can see how, the interesting question always comes of, well, Steve, we've got dev, staging, and production. And then I can go and have this interesting conversation because now I'm starting to get data around like things like Prometheus and stuff like that. And I can go, well, you know what? You're not actually using dev at all. So why don't we just have staging? Because all of this money that we're spending, keeping the development environment online is actually no value at all. And what we could just do is have staging in production. But the only way we know that is because we've got these cookie cutter clusters and we can start to look at the way that they're being used over time. And I think that for me is a powerful lesson. So one, it's, keep the blast radius low. Two, for me, is the consistency of the paradigm. And then three is, the costing. But again, it's going to be different for different folks, right? If you're in a startup, for example, it's just get something out there quick and dirty. But then again, I would still go with a cluster per environment. I may just have only one or two of them.
Nice. Okay. Just while you guys are answering one of the other questions, somebody has come through with a question on the chat. So unless any more come through, I'm assuming this will be the last one. So it's going back to when you was talking about Ingress controllers. So the question is, what do you guys think of Nginx Ingress controller for Kubernetes? Is it worth paying F5 for a support license? Hopefully I pronounced that right.
No, is the answer.
What, or I didn't pronounce it right?
No around the support license, right? Back to what I was saying before, leverage the community. We're all using it, right? We've all, the community is large enough for us to be able to help with that. I think in terms of a choice, it depends for me how far you are on your Kubernetes journey. If you're starting way back when and you're right at the beginning, the Nginx Ingress controller is the default Ingress controller that everybody uses. There's plenty of examples on the internet, on GitHub, of people using Nginx Ingress. As well as that, it's widely adopted, right? It's like Prometheus, it's like Grafana. These things are widely adopted. Loads of people are using them. You could go on the bleeding edge and you could get, a load of features, but actually the stage that you're at in your journey, you don't really need them. All you want is the simplicity for you to be able to route traffic from the outside into your Kubernetes cluster. 9 times out of 10, I would suggest that the issues that you're having, someone else has had them, or the community is going to be able to help you. I would go community first, and then if you can't get what you need from the community, then go and look at support licenses.
Yeah, Ingress is among the more boring parts of Kubernetes. So that's not the bleeding edge right now. So it should be pretty stable.
Ejimofa is the person that asked that question. So yeah, definitely. I'm in the meetup group. Hopefully everybody's in there now. So that could be our community that could be a troubleshooting community. Hopefully that's what it's there for. People like Steve, and Sebastian, and many others in that group, I'm sure can help. That is actually the end of the questions. That brings us to the end of the first DevOps for Everyone virtual meetup. I just want to say a massive thank you to you both for taking your time and the effort to do this. So I really appreciate it. There'll be more to come as well, every sort of 3 months or so, building that community, like you just said, Steve, making it bigger. So yeah, I appreciate your time, and I'm sure we'll see each other down the road, and there may be some questions that come up in the meetup group in a day or two.
No problem. I'll put all my links to everything. Feel free to reach out, and I'm more than happy to help everybody.
Brilliant. Appreciate
Thanks
that.
for having me. Thanks for the very nice discussions.
Yeah, great. And I'm still getting used to Zoom, so I only managed to record half of this, so I do apologise, but I will post what I did manage to record in the group as well. So apologies for anyone that wanted a part that I've missed, but I'll get better. All right.
We're all learning, Paul. You're good.
Yeah, exactly. All right, well, look, I'll let everybody get back to their evenings now, but it's been really good. I appreciate it. Thanks very much for your time.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Cheers.